Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I gotta tell you, I am absolutely thrilled to get into this source material with you today. We're gonna be looking at a seriously fascinating book by Ryuho Okawa called The Laws of Rebirth. It tackles this massive, age-old mystery: what actually happens to our consciousness when our physical bodies finally give out? So whether you're a longtime student of spiritual texts, or you're just kind of curious about how different traditions view the afterlife, buckle up, because this is gonna be a wild and really eye-opening ride.
Now, to really get the most out of what we're looking at today, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit challenging. I want you to kind of pause your everyday secular assumptions for a minute. Take a look at the question right here. Is death truly just an absolute end, like a light bulb burning out? Or is it just a transition to something else? For the rest of this explainer, we're going to put on the text's spiritual glasses and view a world where the soul's journey keeps going way, way past the physical realm.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The four sufferings. 2. Truth of eternal life. 3. Earthbound spirits. 4. Reimagining ancestral rites. And 5. The organ transplant controversy. Let's get into it.
Starting us off with Section 1, the Buddha's Four Sufferings.
So Chapter 1 actually takes us way back, like over 2.5 millennia back, right to the very roots of Buddhism. Check out these 4 universal human fears: birth, aging, sickness, and death. According to the text, these 4 sufferings were the exact things that pushed Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, to leave his life of royalty behind. He wasn't just sitting around philosophizing for the fun of it. He was desperately trying to solve this terrifying reality that, well, our bodies eventually break down.
The book really highlights that the Buddha's entire mission was to crack the code of these 4 physical sufferings. And the wildest part? The answer he arrived at wasn't about escaping reality at all. It was about waking up to a deeper one. The author uses this historical quest as a kind of launch pad for the book's main idea: the reality of eternal life. The whole point is that physical suffering only defines us if we make the mistake of thinking we're just physical bodies.
Moving right along to Section 2, Truth of Eternal Life.
And this brings us to the absolute bedrock of the author's philosophy: the firm claim that the soul actually survives the body. It's a total clash of worldviews, really. You've got the material view saying, yep, death is the absolute end of the road. But the spiritual view in our source material, it argues that consciousness seamlessly transitions right into an afterlife. In fact, the author points out that the people who push back hardest against the idea of an afterlife are usually the most shocked when they actually die. The text leans on near-death experiences as major evidence here, basically saying, look, this spiritual reality is waiting for us whether we believe in it right now or not.
Which leads us to Section 3, Earthbound Spirits and Denial.
Okay, so you might be wondering what actually happens if someone completely denies all this, refuses to believe in any kind of afterlife, and then suddenly dies. Well, the text paints this really vivid, honestly kind of tragic picture of what it calls an earthbound spirit. The author warns that souls who totally reject the afterlife can actually get stuck. Because they don't even believe in a spiritual world, they literally lack the awareness to realize they're dead. So they just wander around the physical world, going to their old jobs, hanging out at their old houses, totally oblivious to the fact that nobody living can see or hear them. They're just trapped in this massive state of denial.
And the text gets super specific and, frankly, pretty chilling about what this looks like. Let's say an unawakened person dies suddenly in a car crash or from a really painful illness like stomach cancer. The book claims their spirit might actually keep feeling intense phantom pain long after their physical body is gone. Because their mind is still 100% identifying with that physical flesh, they keep feeling those agonizing stomach aches or those fatal injuries, just desperately wondering why the pain won't stop. It's intense, right?
Let's shift gears to Section 4, Reimagining Ancestral Memorial Services.
So these spiritual rules aren't just abstract ideas. They have super practical, everyday applications for how we interact with the dead. The source text actually takes a pretty hard swing at how modern society handles funerals and memorials. It argues that just hiring a professional monk to come in and chant some complex sutures, yeah, that's often completely useless. Think about it. If an earthbound spirit is hovering there, totally confused, and a monk is chanting in some ancient language they don't even speak, to them, it's literally just noise. The text says true memorials happen when the living actually take the time to understand spiritual truths so they can actively beam that enlightenment over to the lost soul.
There's this quote from the text that I think is just incredibly powerful. It says, "The living must live correctly to serve as a beacon of light." If your ancestors are lost out there in the spiritual realm, maybe stuck in old family dramas or holding grudges, you can't just ritualize them away. The living relatives, us, have to study the truth, clean up our own earthly lives, and elevate our own minds. By doing that, the text says, living family members become a literal beacon of light to guide their ancestors out of those lower realms. You actually become their lifeline.
All right, on to our final and definitely most controversial topic, Section 5, the organ transplant controversy.
Here is where the author applies these strict spiritual rules directly to modern medical science, specifically when it comes to patients declared brain dead. According to the text, there's this thing called the silver cord. It's described as a literal spiritual tether connecting the physical body to the spiritual body. And here is the kicker. The author insists this cord stays completely intact even when a doctor says someone is clinically brain dead. So, in the eyes of this text, brain death is absolutely not spiritual death. The person's soul is still totally strapped into their physical form.
And this sets up a scenario in the book that is honestly just terrifying. Imagine a patient who's completely paralyzed, medically brain dead, but their soul is wide awake and still attached. The text claims that when doctors start surgery to harvest organs, the patient's soul is screaming in absolute terror and agony, "I am still alive, don't take my organs." But of course, the medical staff in the operating room can't hear a thing.
The author maintains that taking organs from a brain-dead patient causes this excruciating, unimaginable level of spiritual pain. Because that silver cord hasn't been cut, the soul feels every slice of the scalpel. The text presents this as a massive, glaring blind spot in modern medicine. It argues that doctors are operating purely on a material view of life, completely unaware of the massive spiritual trauma they're inflicting on the donor.
But wait, the fallout described in the text doesn't even stop with the donor. It cascades right onto the person receiving the organ. Let's walk through the steps they outline. Step 1. The organ is removed while that spiritual cord is still intact. Step 2. Because the deceased donor still feels like they own that organ, their soul actually follows the organ right into the new body. And step 3. The recipient's body is now literally infiltrated by the foreign and probably pretty traumatized soul of the donor.
So why does this matter? Well, this exact mechanism is how the author explains those crazy stories you hear about organ recipients suddenly experiencing massive personality changes. The text argues that the donor's spirit is basically tethered to the transplanted organ and starts messing with the recipient. If the donor is really strong-willed or super angry, the book says it can even escalate into perfect possession, where the donor's personality just completely hijacks the recipient. It's definitely a wild, intense spiritual critique of something we usually just think of as a life-saving medical procedure.
Wow, we have covered some seriously deep and provocative ground today, haven't we? From the Buddha's ancient quest to some really intense spiritual critiques of modern medicine. The whole point of the Laws of Rebirth is really to challenge us to zoom out, to look past our immediate physical bubble. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If you truly viewed your life, your daily actions, and your inevitable death through the lens of an eternal soul, how would it change the choices you're going to make today? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope it sparked some curiosity and gave you a totally new perspective to chew on. See you next time.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something we all face but maybe don't always want to think about: aging. Specifically, we're going to explore some fascinating insights on how to navigate our modern 80-year lifespan era, looking at the absolutely crucial connection between our mental state, our physical health, and our spiritual readiness. Our roadmap for today's explainer comes from a book called The Laws of Rebirth by Ryuho Okawa. We are going to be zeroing in on Chapter 2 of the text, which offers a highly structured philosophical approach to aging, illness, and health, really tackling that modern fear we all have of outliving our own bodies. It's kind of fascinating when you think about it, right? Modern medicine has created this wild paradox. It does this amazing job of keeping us alive longer, but simply adding years to the clock doesn't automatically mean we're adding quality to those years. Humanity has literally always wished for longer lives, but now that we have them, we are faced with this massive new challenge. How do we actually spend an extended old age without just lingering in a hospital bed? So to break down the solutions from the text, we'll be looking at 4 main areas today. First, the ideal of Pinpin Kurori, or PPK. Second, mindsets prone to cancer. Third, preventing cognitive decline. And finally, physical and spiritual independence.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the ideal of Pinpin Kurori, or PPK.
So what exactly is PPK? Well, it's basically the ultimate goal for old age, according to the author. It stands for living vibrantly and healthily, that's the pin part, and then, when your time finally comes, passing away quickly and peacefully, which is korori. The entire goal here is to live life to the absolute fullest and entirely avoid becoming a long-term burden on your family or the medical system.
To really put this into perspective, think back to the 1960s. Back then, the average life expectancy for a Japanese male was just around 65. But today, we're living in an 80-year lifespan era. That means we literally have about 2 extra decades of free time post-retirement. In the past, you basically worked until the end of your natural life. Now, if your health starts failing at 65, that could mean 20 years of suffering. That's why hitting that vibrant PPK ideal is an absolute game changer.
Moving on to Section 2, Mindsets Prone to Cancer. Now, this is where it gets really profound. The text outlines 2 very distinct psychological mindsets that, if suppressed for 10 to 20 years, can actually manifest physically as cancer cells. It asserts that our minds and bodies are deeply intertwined. First, you have the aggressive type. This is someone directing destructive energy outward, constantly harboring hatred, anger, and hostility toward others. Then you have the self-punishing type, where that destruction is directed inward through strong guilt, being way too strict with yourself, and constant self-condemnation. These long-held negative thoughts act like a spiritual poison that eventually attacks the physical body. So what's the antidote? According to the text, a truly peaceful mind and the feeling of self-forgiveness are absolutely key. And for all you perfectionists out there, listen up. You have to learn to accept yourself, even if you're only hitting a 70% mark. Letting go of those long-held grudges and giving yourself a break is framed as a vital, preventative health measure. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3. Preventing cognitive decline. The author poses a very direct, hard-hitting question here. What is the primary criteria for preventing senility? And the answer is incredibly simple: the reading habit. Specifically, reading at least 1 book a week is the standard used to gauge if someone might become senile. Now, I know, as we hit our 40s and 50s, presbyopia kicks in, our eyesight gets blurry, and reading becomes a total chore. It's so easy to just stop. But the author insists, no excuses. Go get proper reading glasses, buy books with larger print, and keep reading. Forcing yourself through that physical barrier is your ultimate firewall against mental decay. And it goes beyond just reading. The text lays out a highly specific, practical daily routine. We're talking reading books regularly, studying languages via radio or TV, tackling original text materials, and get this, doing 100-cell math calculations while timing yourself. The biggest piece of advice here is to totally discard your adult pride. Even if it feels kind of silly or childish to practice handwriting or do basic multiplication with a stopwatch, that active, challenging stimulation is exactly what keeps the brain's pathways alive and firing.
All right, bringing it all together with Section 4, Physical and Spiritual Independence.
There's a really fascinating progression outlined here. Step 1, engage in joint-friendly exercise, things like walking or aquatic workouts to safely drop excess weight. Step 2, use that physical upkeep to maintain your independence, avoiding falls or sudden weakness. And Step 3, use that hard-earned independence to properly prepare your mind for the afterlife. You can't just focus on the brain. You have to maintain the physical vessel too. By staying physically independent, you aren't reliant on others, which completely frees your mind to focus on deeper spiritual matters. And your attitude during your later years? It matters immensely. The text contrasts 2 states, gratitude versus blame. Maintaining a cheerful, bright attitude and being genuinely thankful for your surroundings truly elevates the soul. On the flip side, complaining, getting angry, and blaming your family or the hospital creates a negative spiritual state that's literally compared to hell. Cultivating gratitude is what brightens your environment and readies your spirit. So, the ultimate takeaway is that avoiding prolonged illness isn't just about earthly comfort. Training both your mind and body to live independently is framed as crucial preparation for a smooth transition back to the heavenly world. How we manage our health, our minds, and our emotional baggage today directly dictates our spiritual trajectory tomorrow. Living joyfully and independently in this 80-year lifespan era is basically the ultimate rehearsal for what comes next.
I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. How are you training your mind and body today to ensure a peaceful, vibrant transition tomorrow? It's a profound connection, isn't it? Whether it's finally picking up that book, forgiving yourself for a mistake, or just taking a walk around the block, every little action is a step toward that vibrant, independent ideal. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are tackling something absolutely massive. We're decoding the spiritual laws regarding our ultimate destination. I mean, think about it. Whether you've spent years pondering the afterlife out of deep philosophical curiosity, or you just occasionally wonder what's next, the concepts we're looking at today offer this incredibly structured, almost architectural blueprint of what comes after death. And more importantly, how the choices we make right this second are literally building that future.
So let's jump right in with the ultimate question from Chapter 3 of our source material. What actually determines where you go after death? Is it some giant cosmic scoreboard, a tally of good deeds versus bad? Well, as we're going to see, the answer provided is way more intrinsic. It is deeply, deeply tied to our everyday psychology. To thoroughly understand this vision of the afterlife, we'll be climbing a structural ladder through 4 specific steps. 1. The state of mind after death. 2. The fifth dimension's criteria. 3. Practicing the Eightfold Path. And finally, 4. Ascending to higher dimensions. Now, all of our insights today are drawn directly from Ryuho Okawa's comprehensive spiritual text, The Laws of Rebirth. Specifically, we're zoning in on Chapter 3, which lays out highly actionable criteria for entering what the text defines as heaven. So this isn't just some abstract philosophical musing. It's presented as a literal, step-by-step guide.
Okay, let's look at the foundational premise. Section 1, State of Mind After Death, the Ultimate Mirror.
Right here in Chapter 3, Ways to Return to Heaven, the core spiritual law is surprisingly straightforward, but man, is it profoundly challenging. The rule is this: your destination after death is strictly determined by your state of mind during your lifetime. Look, in the physical world, sure, we can hide our true feelings behind a polite smile. But according to this text, in the next world, your mind is completely, 100% exposed.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that you cannot fake your way into heaven. Your internal frequency sets your external reality. If your mind is full of gratitude and peace, you naturally gravitate to a realm that reflects exactly that. On the flip side, if your mind is constantly clouded with anger or resentment, you are drawn to a world that perfectly mirrors those turbulent emotions. It's kind of like the ultimate law of attraction, just operating on a cosmic scale.
Now that we know that fundamental rule, let's move to Section 2, the fifth dimension's criteria, the realm of good people. To actually enter this specific realm, the text lays down some incredibly strict emotional and spiritual baseline criteria. You must possess a pure heart, you have to be capable of genuinely blessing others' happiness, and you must be completely free from envy and jealousy. Now, that sounds simple enough on paper, right? But think about how hard that actually is in practice. We're talking about completely eradicating that subtle, everyday negativity we usually just excuse as being human.
This brings us to a brilliant illustration of the core requirement for entering the fifth dimension, which the author calls the enlightenment of love. Listen, this is not a transactional kind of love where you do a favor and expect one back. No way. It is purely about unconditional output. It's a love that just radiates outward, much like the sun, without ever calculating what it's going to get in return. The author grounds this high-minded concept in some very sharp everyday reality. He essentially asks us to evaluate our gut reactions. Let's say a colleague gets that major promotion over you, or a neighbor gets a massive financial windfall. What is your immediate, internal reaction? Do you sincerely think, wow, I am so happy for them? Or does a little dark cloud of envy form? If it's the latter, the text warns us, we haven't quite mastered the fifth dimension yet.
Which begs the question, how do you maintain that pure state when life gets stressful? That brings us to Section 3, Practicing the Eightfold Path, Maintaining the Frequency.
The text brings in the Eightfold Path, which you might recognize as a core Buddhist concept, but it applies it here as a highly necessary, active maintenance tool. Think of it as your daily spiritual checklist. It's designed for self-reflection, basically keeping your mind from clouding over with those worldly attachments and negative emotions we just talked about. It is exactly how you continuously tune your internal frequency back to heaven's wavelength.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how the author prescribes gender-specific criteria for this daily maintenance, drawing on typical societal roles, which we are presenting exactly as they're outlined in the text. He notes that women should place a particular focus on right speech, specifically being mindful to control complaints and negative words, especially in domestic settings. Men, on the other hand, acting as warriors in the corporate world, need to heavily focus on right view,
which means reevaluating hostile, combative workplace mentalities and deep-seated prejudices. It's a really interesting look at applying ancient spiritual principles to modern societal dynamics.
Once the fifth dimension is mastered, the author looks even further upward. Section 4, Ascending to Higher Dimensions, Letting Go of the Self.
Let's map out this progressive ascent. We start at the fifth dimension, which is the baseline of being a good person. But watch how the criteria shift as we move up the ladder. To reach the sixth dimension, known as the realm of the Arhat, you have to shift from just being good to actively living to serve others, like a dedicated leader or teacher. Then, moving even higher to the seventh dimension, the realm of the Bodhisattva, requires an almost total selfless devotion. That's where the distinction between your own personal happiness and the happiness of all humanity essentially disappears.
Notice the stark contrast here. The fifth dimension is a beautiful state, for sure, but it's ultimately still somewhat self-contained. You're focused on living a good, pure life for yourself and not harming others. But advancing higher, that requires a monumental pivot. It requires completely letting go of self-attachment in favor of serving the greater good. Basically, the higher you go, the less you think about I, and the more you think about we.
This powerful concept serves as the ultimate goal of the spiritual ladder described by the author. Ascending isn't about acquiring more spiritual knowledge or power just for yourself. It's about shedding the ego entirely. It is a challenging, profound shift from the desire to simply be a good person to the desire to be an instrument of goodness for the entire world. So I'll leave you with this final thought to reflect on as we wrap up this explainer. If the afterlife truly is a perfect, unavoidable mirror of our earthly state of mind, well, we are essentially the architects of our own spiritual destination right now. Every single thought, every reaction to a coworker, every moment of gratitude or envy is literally laying a brick. So based on your state of mind today, what dimension are you building for your tomorrow? Thanks for joining me and keep exploring.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into Chapter 4 of our source text to unpack a totally fascinating, mind-bending interpretation of existence. We're looking at a framework that argues our present actions strictly and unavoidably determine our future spiritual realities. It's a deep dive into the Buddhist law of cause and effect, laid out in a really structured way. So if you've ever wondered about the actual, literal mechanics of karma, or how your everyday thoughts might translate into a physical, spiritual destination, where you literally end up, this is going to be an incredibly eye-opening journey. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the law of karma, move on to this concept called your needle of the mind, explore the realms of hell, look at teaming the three desires, and finally wrap things up with atonement through faith. Let's get right into it.
So Section 1, the law of karma. To really get this, we've got to zoom out and look at the ultimate timeline the author lays out for the human soul.
Right off the bat, the text drops a major concept on us. Human existence isn't just a one-off event. As we see in Chapter 4, aptly titled Cause and Effect, life is governed by the absolute Buddhist principle that every single cause inevitably has an effect. We have to view our lives across a much, much grander scale than just the here and now.
And this illustrates that core rule perfectly. Check this out. Existence spans 3 interconnected lifetimes. Your past lifetime, that built the foundation. Your present lifetime, the joys, the struggles, your current environment, that's all the direct result of those past actions. But here is the absolute kicker. Your future lifetime is determined strictly by how you live today. It's like you're literally writing the script for your next life, right at this very second.
Which brings us nicely to Section 2, your needle of the mind. If we're writing our future right now, we kind of need to know exactly how that destination is being calculated, right?
To explain this, the author introduces a vital and honestly super cool concept called the needle of the mind. Picture it like a highly sensitive internal compass for your soul. It doesn't track your bank account or your physical location, it strictly tracks your inner state. It points toward your true spiritual frequency based entirely on your daily thoughts and intentions. And wherever that needle eventually settles, that is what fundamentally determines your destination after death.
Now you might be thinking, okay, but I follow the rules. Well, look at the stark contrast here between physical and spiritual reality. On the surface, you and your neighbor might live under the exact same worldly rules. You might seem completely equal. But spiritually, it's a totally different ballgame. When the earthly rules fall away, you could face vastly different spiritual outcomes based entirely on where your inner needle points. Society judges the outside, but the universe, it's looking strictly at your inner state.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the realms of hell. What actually happens if that inner compass is pointed in the completely wrong direction? Well, the source material does not pull any punches here. It is highly specific about the consequences when people abandon their noble human values and just sort of succumb to their base animalistic instincts. Hell, in this framework, isn't just a generic fiery pit. It's a highly categorized system of spiritual consequences.
The author actually maps out the literal hells created by specific character failures. It's pretty intense. For example, if you're consumed by excessive greed and attachment, you fall into the realm of hungry ghosts, a place of just insatiable craving. Got an issue with sexual misconduct? That leads to lustful realms like the hell of the blood pool. What about anger, violence, or just being overly combative? That drops you straight into the Ashura realm, a world of endless conflict. And if you completely abandon human dignity for animalistic tendencies, you might actually face rebirth in the animal realm. Think literally coming back as a snake or a fox. The spiritual consequence perfectly mirrors the earthly behavior.
Given those incredibly stark realities, Section 4 looks at taming the 3 desires. How do we prevent our needle from swinging toward those lower realms?
The foundational solution here is surprisingly biological. It all comes down to exerting rigorous, conscious control over our 3 most basic human desires: food, sex, and sleep. Yep, just the primal baseline. The text argues that if these urges go unchecked, they are the main culprits that drag the needle of the mind right down into the mud.
So to prevent this spiritual debt or negative karma, we absolutely have to deeply reflect and master those urges. Now, it's not saying you have to be completely ascetic or deny yourself everything. It's about equilibrium, right? It's about bringing your conscious will to govern how you eat, your sexuality, and how you rest. Elevating yourself above pure animal instinct keeps your inner needle stable and far away from those hellish realms we just looked at.
But hey, what if you're looking back and thinking, uh-oh, I've already racked up some karmic debt? That brings us to our final part, Section 5, Atonement Through Faith. The text lays out a very concrete 4-step pathway to clear that karma. Step 1, deeply and honestly reflect on your past actions. Step 2, get those basic desires under control like we just discussed. But steps 3 and 4 are where it gets super proactive. Step 3 is engaging in a life of dedicated faith. And step 4, performing missionary work to actively spread the truth. According to the source, just stopping the bad stuff isn't always enough to clear a heavy karmic tab. You've got to generate massive positive momentum. And doing missionary work, guiding other people toward a better spiritual path, is highly recommended. It generates this tremendous spiritual merit that can literally atone for past sins and fundamentally rewrite your future. You're basically paying off your own spiritual debts by enriching the spiritual lives of the people around you. A real win-win. So it all boils down to this. If the law of cause and effect is absolute, and your future lifetime is strictly determined by how you live, the thoughts you hold, and the actions you take right at this very second, you've got to ask yourself, where is your needle pointing today? It's a profound question and definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. We really hope it gave you some powerful, perspective-shifting food for thought. Keep your needle pointed true, and we'll catch you next time.
Welcome back to The Explainer. I've got to tell you, I'm absolutely thrilled to jump into our topic today. We're going to be exploring some truly fascinating source material from a remarkable text called The Laws of Rebirth, and we'll be specifically unpacking its profound 5th chapter. This chapter fundamentally challenges how we view our day-to-day existence and, well, what happens when it all comes to an end.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want you to imagine something for a second. What if your entire life, every triumph, every little mistake, every quiet moment where you thought you were completely alone, was actually taking place inside a monitored room? Are we constantly being watched from the other side? It's a pretty striking thought, isn't it? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go. Okay, let's dive into this. We are looking at the very foundation of our explainer today, a chapter beautifully titled On the Eternal Nature of Life. This is exactly where these profound metaphysical concepts originate, and we're going to break them all down step by step. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the spiritual training ground. Second, the two-way mirror. Third, tech versus spirituality. Fourth, the silver cord case study. And finally, your life's true mission.
Section 1, the spiritual training ground. Right out of the gate, we need a massive perspective shift. We so often think of Earth as our primary home, right, or our final destination. But the text asks us to look at it completely differently, as a temporary classroom.
Studying spiritual truths isn't just some weekend hobby or a casual passing interest. According to the author, it is quite literally compulsory education for the soul. Just like math, science, or reading in grade school, learning the nature of the spiritual world is a mandatory curriculum. And we're all enrolled in it right now, simply by being alive.
Moving right along to Section 2, the two-way mirror. This brings us to what is easily one of the most striking metaphors in the entire book. It defines the real world, which is the eternal, spiritual realm, as a place that is constantly observing our earthly lives. It likens this dynamic to looking through a two-way mirror into an interrogation room. We, down here on Earth, are in the room. We can't see out. But the spiritual realm? It's right there on the other side of that glass, watching our spiritual progress in real time. It completely bridges the unseen world with our tangible, day-to-day reality.
Section 3. Tech versus Spirituality.
Now, having established that Earth is this monitored training ground, the author issues a major, glaring warning to modern society. There's a deep tension here. The author argues that as a civilization's scientific and technological capabilities rapidly advance, its spiritual awareness absolutely must grow at the exact same pace to maintain equilibrium. Think about it. An advanced scientific civilization without a correspondingly high spirituality is incredibly dangerous. It essentially loses its soul. We have to consciously balance our external, technological progress with internal, spiritual growth.
Section 4. The Silver Cord Case Study. So, let's shift from abstract theory into actual practice. But before we get into the specifics of this real-world story, we need to define a crucial piece of spiritual anatomy, the silver cord. Think of this as the vital, energetic tether connecting your physical, earthly body to your eternal soul. It's the literal lifeline between the two worlds. When a person reaches the end of their life, this cord must be severed for the soul to properly transition.
To show us exactly how these mechanics work, the author of The Laws of Rebirth, Ryuho Okawa, shares a deeply personal account. He details the passing of his own father, Saburo Yoshikawa, who actually served as the honorary advisor of Happy Science. His father's passing serves as the ultimate, real-world test of what happens when someone possesses deep spiritual knowledge.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer, incredible efficiency of his transition. Look at this timeline. Minute 0 marks his physical passing. In just over a single hour, his silver cord was completely severed. And from there, it was a smooth, immediate transition into eternity. For many people who completely lack spiritual understanding, this process can take days of confusion and clinging. But for him, it took barely an hour. Why?
The logic behind this flawless transition is beautiful in its simplicity. His silver cord snapped cleanly because he had deeply internalized those spiritual truths during his lifetime. He actually did his compulsory education. Because he had a firm, unwavering belief in the afterlife, there was absolutely zero hesitation or fear when the moment arrived. And most importantly, he had an utter lack of worldly attachment to hold him back in the interrogation room.
The text really hits the nail on the head with this quote, "Possessing spiritual knowledge makes a decisive difference in the dying process." I really want to emphasize that this isn't meant to be a sad story, quite the opposite actually. It's a brilliantly successful case study of a soul passing its final earthly exams with flying colors. It proves that what we learn here directly impacts what happens next.
Finally, Section 5, Your Life's True Mission.
The obvious question is, what do we actually do with all this information right now, today? And this brilliantly illustrates how the source text distills these heavy, metaphysical theories into a highly actionable three-step life mission for us. To fulfill your earthly mission, you must 1. Constantly maintain the perspective of the real world. Always remember that two-way mirror. 2. Live your earthly life actively as a purposeful training ground, not just a place to accumulate wealth or status. And 3. Make every single effort to pass this light of truth to as many people as possible.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to wrap up today's explainer. You are in the training ground right now. When your time eventually comes and your silver cord is ready to sever, will you hesitate and cling to the glass? Or will you be completely ready for the world on the other side? Think about that, keep studying, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.